Have you ever seen a flower garden so gorgeous that you wished you could just preserve it forever? Well, that's how I felt about my garden this summer. Follow along with me in this video as I recreate 5 summer flowers in a polymer clay slab. Although it looks very complex and detailed, each step is fairly simple, building to a beautiful result. Hi there, Sandy here. Welcome to another Keepsake Crafts polymer clay tutorial. Here are the 5 flowers we are going to sculpt for this slab. What we are making are Snapdragons, Marigolds, Black-Eyed Susans, Echinacea, also known as purple coneflower, and Balm. The first thing you need to consider when you're thinking about your slab is your background. What are you going to do for your background? Are you going to do a solid color? You could do a speckled color, like with embossing powders. You could do translucent with or without powder. You could do a texture. So this is just solid black clay, and this is solid brown clay, and you can see it gives it a very different look, whatever you decide on for your background. Now, if you're going to spend all the time sculpting these flowers, and these 5 flowers are not quick, so if you're going to do that, you really want to take the time to do a little bit of testing. These are all Cernit Translucent clay that I mixed with different amounts. I used the greens that I used in my stems. This one is just the Cernit with the green. This one has a little bit of yellow embossing powder in it. This one has some green embossing powder. This one has way too much black embossing powder. And this one, I took this that had the way too much black embossing powder and then just added a pinch of this. And by the way, this is these colors before they're baked, and these samples are all baked, just to give you an idea. What I did was I took a pinch of my green translucent with way too much black and just added that to more translucent. So you can always do that, but really it's best to do a test because you just can't always tell, especially when you're working with translucents. Also, you need to think about the thickness because once you add these flowers to your background, you're not going to be able to change the thickness. So you kind of need to have an idea of what you're going to do with it. Now, because of the nature of this slab, you want to be sure that your background is really nice before you get started. If you're going for something without a texture and you just want a smooth slab, you want to burnish this well, especially if you're using a thicker setting from your pasta machine, because it often ends up with pasta machine lines. So get a piece of paper. This is Deli paper. You could also just use plain printing paper and burnish it. You can use your fingers. I found the best way to get a really smooth burnishing is to use my acrylic roller. Just go over the whole thing, over the paper, and this gives you whoop, the flattest, smoothest result. Now for colors, I am not going to give you exact recipes because you should just pull out some scraps that you have in your polymer clay. Use colors that you love. But I'll give you some tips. So I started with just kind of a medium green and made a few different variations so not all of my flowers would have the exact same green. So I added a little bit of a blue to this one, just a little, and then for this one I added a little bit more. So I've got these 3 blues, and then for this one I added some yellow. So now I have an array, and there's another green yellow floating around here somewhere where I added even more yellow. So you can get a nice array of colors that all goes together with that simple trick of starting with the same color and just adding a little bit to bring it to either side. So this is my slab. However, one thing I figured out was that I didn't necessarily want to do all of my arrangements on my raw polymer clay slab. So I'm actually going to show you how to build these just on the tile. We'll start with just a green. You can do a stem or without a stem. The Snapdragons did end up keeping their stems no matter what, but for the other ones like the Echinacea or the Black-Eyed Susans, I actually found that for the compositions I was making, I was happier with them without the stems. But you can make them with the stem and actually trim the stems off later. For the most flexibility and creative freedom, create your pieces on the tile. So start with the green of your choice. To make nice even stems, use just an acrylic block to roll them out. And I'll build a little bit of a curve in here. If you're going to have the stems exposed, then have this kind of nice rolled end down where you have the end of the stem. And up here we'll just cut that. We'll have the cut end up here because that's going to be covered with the flower. The Snapdragon is the exception, and that's the first one I'm going to show you. But most of them will just have the cut end and then the flower gets built on it. For the Snapdragons, you want to roll a couple of really tiny ovals. Well, like several. These are maybe 2 by 1 millimeter. And I'm going to put a few at the top. And then I'll save a few to add along the stem. Because if you look at the way Snapdragons grow, they grow along the stem. And these are like little buds. That's very much a part of the look. So I'll make a few and just set them aside. For all of the flower colors, I'm going to have you roll the clay at the thinnest setting of your pasta machine. On my pasta machine, that is about 1/3 of a millimeter. Next, I'm going to use this little heart cutter from the Kemper cutters. This is the 3/16 inch set. I'm going to cut just a few, somewhere around 5, but you can vary it. You know, the way I came up with these, if you want to come up with designs for making flowers that are special to you from your garden, this was actually just from observing. I was sitting out having my breakfast, which I do every day in the summer, looking at the flowers, and they were kind of a distance away from me, so they were a little blurry. And I just thought they sort of looked like heart shapes that were folded over, and it worked out beautifully. Next, you'll need a needle tool, and I love this bent needle tool. So you'll cut a heart for each one, and then place it on your fingertip. Kind of take a rounded part of your needle tool and indent that lobe a little bit more. Not a ton, just a little bit more. So it's a little more pronounced. And I'm kind of using my finger, my thumb, and just tapping on it to thin out and smooth those edges. Next, I'm going to place the needle tool across, separating the lobes from the point. And I'm going to use my thumb to roll that point down over. So it's folding that little heart in half. Then I will use the needle tool to just press it onto the stem. And give 1 or 2 presses with the needle tool to press it in place. And that's it. Repeat for several of these. So flatten a little, indent the lobes, fold it, and then place them kind of offset. So not all in a straight row. And you know, when you're straight on top of it, it doesn't look much like Snapdragons, but it's kind of that impressionistic view that I had, as I said, as I was eating my breakfast and looking at it from a distance, that when you back up, it looks just like Snapdragons. You can also add a couple of these little buds somewhere in there, in between them. That one's a little big. Because if you look at them, that's the way they grow. And isn't that sweet? I just love them. I have never grown Snapdragons in my garden before, but I was at the farm stand this spring, and somebody had them for sale. They had started them. And, well, of course, you know me and my dragons, so the name just intrigued me. And I was like, oh, Snapdragons, I think I must grow those. So I'm going to add just a couple more of these little green ovals along the stem. Oh, I don't care for that one. It's too small. Oop. Fine. There it is. Under there. And you can even add a couple of ovals of the main color, the flower color, up top, because if you look at them, they're often popping out up there. And there you can bake that right on the tile, just as it is. Here you can see a couple I finished on a black background, and here are others that I created just on the tile. The beauty of having them all baked on the tile is that I can use these however I like and arrange them on my slab in whichever way suits me best, and I don't have to risk smushing them and wrecking them as I move them and rearrange them. Next we'll do marigolds. So here is orange, which I created with some Premo Orange and just a little bit of Sculpey Soufflé Canary to make this orange shade. Again, the orange is rolled on the thinnest setting. For each marigold, I am going to cut 6 circles with this 3/16 inch cutter. Then you want to cut each of your circles in half and roll each one into a ball. This is just a way of giving you a fairly consistent size. They don't have to be perfect, but this helps you get really tiny things, which can be very difficult to get into consistent sizes. I have a confession to make. Orange is absolutely my least favorite color. I plant marigolds in my garden because they tend to deter pests. These marigolds that I got this year were so tall and so aggressively orange, and yet I couldn't help but love them because they added so much color to the landscape. When I was a child, I remember one year in school, towards the end of the school year, they had us plant seeds. And then on the last day of school, we got to bring home our little paper cup with our seedlings. And I remember bringing it to my grandparents, because they were very much into growing things, so they were interested in what I had done. And they asked me what I had planted. And I told them quite confidently that I had planted burpee margies. And all the adults in the room were confused. What is a burpee margie? Well, that's exactly what it said on the seed packet. It was Burpee Company's marigolds. Burpee margies. Yeah. All right, so you got all of your 12 little balls. Now you just want to take some paper and press each one onto the tile into somewhat of a circle, kind of flat. You don't want to press it so much that it squidges and sticks to your paper. I like this Deli paper, and one side's a little more waxy, so I'll make sure and put that side down. But you want somewhat circular shapes and pretty flat. You can kind of feel if it's lumpy in the middle, so press it out a little more. Yep. So that they're pretty thin, because that's the key to get this. So yeah, marigolds, good for deterring pests and adding lots and lots of color to your landscape. And the best tool for this is super high tech. I don't know, you might not be able to find one. No, I'm kidding. It's a toothpick. It really does the best job. I tried needle tools and all kinds of things, and I found a toothpick worked the best. Just from the outside in, go around each of these and rough it up. That's it. And those little crumbly bits you can kind of push back in, but don't worry about them. This was another one, as I sat outside looking at them from a distance, I was trying to kind of squint and, reduce the idea down to its essence. What do they look like? So that you kind of get the idea without having to make all of the literal detail. By the way, these 12 circles will make one flower plus a bud, because those are really pretty too. Now for these, instead of using a 6-inch long clay blade, I recommend just using a single edge razor blade. I found you have a bit more control. So you want to put it down on your tile and then use it to scoop up one of your little petals. And actually I want just a teeny weeny pinch, just a little oval that we're going to build it on. So I'm going to again slide it onto my finger and press the blade
about halfway across it, and then use my thumb to fold it in half. Tuck my toothpick in and use that to fold it into quarters. And then use the toothpick to move it onto your spot. You can also make this out of orange. I just kind of like the contrast of having a little bit of the green showing through. These ones are entirely orange, as you can see. Actually, these ones are ones that I cut the stems off them. I made them on stems, but then found on my slab I really didn't want stems, but you can definitely build them on stems. And I was looking at the details, like the marigold at the base kind of has that bulgy bit, but you don't have to get quite that literal. So repeat for 10 or 11 of these. Slide it onto your finger, fold it in half, use the toothpick, fold it in quarters, and then move it onto here. One thing about making these flowers is if you haven't learned it yet, it will teach you to have a very light, delicate touch with the clay. You really have to handle it very lightly in order to preserve all of these teeny tiny details. And don't worry, that's pretty wonky looking. It doesn't matter. We're just trying to get those roughly outer bits that look like a marigold. You could also do it in different colors and have a carnation. If you roll it like that, like I did by mistake, you're going to lose some of your edges. But that's okay, you can still use it. Just tuck it in there. It won't matter. But try not to do that, because you do end up losing some of those little frilly bits that translate to marigold. This is not a quick process. This takes a while. I think for my demo bits, which I'll show you in a couple minutes, I made 4 of each of the 5 flowers, and I think it took me 3 hours. I think I listened to 3 1-hour-long podcasts while doing it. So yeah, 3 hours. So there, isn't that sweet? I would recommend, especially if you're making jewelry with this, that you go in and just ever so lightly tap on it and get rid of any crumbly, grabby bits. But these last 2 will make a bud, and you do the exact same thing. You can use 1 or 2. I have this one here that's made with just 1. I thought it might be a little cuter with 2. I actually made 2 of these. They were so tiny though that one went zinging across my studio and I haven't found it yet. I don't know where it went. One of these days it will turn up. I'm just going to put that on the tile. Yeah, I think this is better with 2 for the buds, but depends on how big you want them to be, I suppose. And then the buds, kind of like this I did here. I'll have this little oval. And there's a marigold bud and a marigold. Aren't they sweet? The black-eyed Susans are the next, and you can use these exact same techniques to make daisies. Just change the colors. You can do probably all kinds of flowers that have a similar look. So for this one, it's actually kind of an orangey yellow color. So I use the exact same colors, the Premo Orange and the Sculpey Soufflé Canary, but just more yellow and a pinch of orange to get this orangey yellow. But just take a look at the flowers that you want to create. Look at pictures you've taken, or look at the real thing in your own garden and study the colors and think about them, because there are so many variations on all of these. There is not just one kind of black-eyed Susan. There's not just one color of Snapdragon. But anyways, the color is rolled out on the thinnest setting of my pasta machine. And again, I'm going to cut 6 3/16 inch circles and then cut them in half. In this case, it is not a problem if they're not quite exactly the same size. We'll utilize the smaller ones to give us a bit of perspective. So we are going to roll these each to about a 1/4 inch long, and we don't want to make them too tapered. And the way you do that is to not roll them between your fingers, but roll them on the tile and focus on kind of rolling in the center. I got clay all under my fingers. Big surprise there. Rolling in the center of your little log, and then you'll end up with blunt tips. If you roll it in your fingers, you end up with these kind of pointy tips on the ends. So roll your ball in your fingers, then roll it on the tile, like I said, focusing on the center, and then you end up with these more even logs that are have blunt ends. So do that for all 12 of your pieces. Here's my 12 pieces. Now it depends on what you're planning on doing with these. If you want to make something that is a composition of a few of these pieces like this, then you might want to have stems. Like I could cut that out maybe slightly bigger and make a really cute piece. So now we're going to place these around a center. If you have some that the ends came out pointy, just put the more blunt ends out. And if you have some that are smaller than others, then put the smaller ones towards the top or the back, and that gives the illusion of foreshortening. And you can just tap it down. So I'm going to place like 4 down in roughly an X shape. So I'll do the smallest towards the back, longest in the front, and I know these got like clay on them from my fingers for other things I made. I'm not worried about it. Let's see. Do like 4 at a time. And you go in the center. Use a blade. This is just a craft knife to make a couple lines. That's what works for Black-Eyed Susans, but if you're doing something else, just look at what you've got and see what the petals have for texture. The Black-Eyed Susans have kind of blunt ends, and they're a little bit like indented on the ends. So you can use your blade and do that. I can add a few more, again, shorter ones towards the back. Longer ones towards the front. Whatever markings or texture are appropriate. Like I said, you could make these with white clay, in which case wash your hands first, which I obviously didn't do here. White clay with yellow centers. Or I'm sure there were all sorts of other flowers out there with a similar petal configuration that you could make. I think I'm going to put that one there just because it seems to work. I just love making these. There's something very relaxing and soothing. Yeah, it's time consuming, which is another reason I'm doing it this way on the tile. And then a little tiny bit of brown clay, because even though they are called Black-Eyed Susans, if you look closely, their centers are more brown. So roll an oval and use a needle tool to stab it all over. This will give it a more realistic texture and also help stick it down. Next I have for you Echinacea, or purple coneflower. I love the look of these flowers. For this one, I rolled my color and then mixed in some white and left it streaky, because that was just the look of the flowers. You don't have to do that. You can keep them solid. It's fine. And in this case, I am going to use the 3/16 inch teardrop cutter. I'm going to cut 3 or 4 teardrops for each flower. And I cut them so that these streaks are going along the length of the cutter. Again, details that maybe don't matter hugely in the end, but they make me happy. I'm going to cut each of these in half lengthwise. And you almost, at this point, have the shape of your petals. They're just not quite right. You want to use your fingers to kind of sharpen that rounded end to a point, is all. You can do that with both ends. Just kind of get it between your thumb and forefinger and sharpen it. That's that. Do that for each of those petals, and you'll use, 6 to 8 per flower. And you don't need a lot of pressure, just gentle taps will get that shape the way you want it. I've shaped all of my petals, and now I'm going to start arranging my flowers. When you look at pictures of purple coneflower, they tend to be kind of droopy. They can be a little more upright like this, but mostly the classic look is more like this, where they're all drooping down. Here's a few I've made. So you just pick up your petals and start building them around the center and add a few. Then use a blade to add some lines to each petal. And unlike the Black-Eyed Susans, these stay pointy on the ends. You can kind of overlap a couple. Just make sure you add your texture before you add another petal overlapping. Yeah, I think I'll just do maybe one more right here. So yeah, 6 to 8. I've got 7 petals here. Now for this cone center, again, I got kind of literal. I was looking at my photos of the garden. You can see it here. And I noticed the shading from the orange to the brown, and I really liked that. So I made myself a little tiny blend. This is some burnt umber, some more of that Premo Orange with kind of a coppery brown that was just a scrap in between. I made a blend, and then as you send it through your pasta machine, you just keep pushing it over and over and over to make it narrower and narrower until your blend is like this. So the orange is here and the darker brown is here. You can squish it down and make it really narrow, because what you want is to cut that out with a teardrop cutter with the orange bit at the pointy part of the teardrop. And I squish this with my finger, so it's kind of thick. Some of these might be a little bigger than is strictly necessary. And I'm going to use just a thumbnail and kind of flatten that orange tip so it's more of an oval and less of a teardrop. I just want that orange at the tip. You could just use a bit of like the copper color. You don't have to get quite as detailed as I did here. I just wanted to. So you just put that down there and then add your pokes with your needle tool, and you can kind of shape it with the needle tool as you do this, and this will also help stick it in place. And if you don't know about making blends, I have a video on my channel that I will link to show you how to do that. And by the way, if you're interested in any of the supplies I use, be sure to check in the description box where I have links to all the products. Yes, most of those are affiliate links. I get a little tiny bit of money for every purchase that you make. If you go to an Amazon link and purchase something there, I get a little tiny pennies on the dollar, fractions of pennies on the dollar. I can guarantee it pretty much all goes back into craft supplies that I use to continue to make videos, though. So it's a win-win. So you can see I slid this up because what I'm doing is I'm adding all of these to a tile, which I will bake. Now if you're going to build the bee balm on a stem, what you want to do is add a very narrow stem and then add a small green oval to the top. I'm not going to build mine on a stem though, but I will do the small green oval. And it's funny how that is probably 3 times bigger than I need. Just this little tiny, you can see it on my finger, just this little tiny thing. We'll build it on that. And here again is my bee balm color rolled to the thinnest setting of my pasta machine. And we're back to using the circle, and for each flower you'll need 3 of the 3/16 inch circles. And you are going to cut those into quarters, little tiny pieces. And roll each of these pieces into a long, thin piece. Roll it on the tiles so it doesn't get too pointy, but it can be not quite as blunt as the Black-Eyed Susans. I mean, these just look like scraps that you would throw away, that you would wipe up and toss. I'm always amazed. And yet, look what it makes, so pretty. Tell me what flowers you like in your garden. I know as I'm making this video, it's October 2020, and so the season is ending. The summer season of a very strange year is ending. Hopefully the strange year part is ending too, because goodness, it's been odd. But what flowers are you looking forward to planting? Or if you're in a different climate, maybe Australia, where things are starting to grow, it's spring, let me know what you're planting. So now we're going to curve each of these. And the best way to do that is pick it up. And I'm going to start with the smallest ones again that will go in the back. Pick it up, put it on your finger. Then use your thumb and index finger and just press from each side. And that makes it curve. And if you can get it in place with your fingers, you probably can't. If you can, fine. If not, a needle tool, especially the needle tool that you've been using to poke into clay, will be a little sticky, and it will often just pick that clay bit right up like that. And then you can put it. So we'll put the shorter ones towards the back. And just curve it. You can just do it the way I just did. It doesn't give you an even curve like that, which is fine. It doesn't have to be. Come in. If you're going to squish anything, squish the bit that is going in the center, because we're going to add this little bit of light green. Bee balm is another nice one because, well, bee balm, it actually attracts bees to the garden, and you want to attract pollinators to your garden. This time of year, like I said, it's October as I'm recording this, and I'm preserving a lot of herbs and things, drying them for tea, mint, and seasoning like oregano and basil, just throwing them in the dehydrator, and then we'll have them all winter. So we're just kind of working my way towards the front, and I'm saving the longest ones for the very front. Kind of looks like a firework, doesn't it? The very longest ones for the front, I'm going to cut in half, because as you're looking at them, they're sort of foreshortened, so you don't see the whole thing. So you can cut them in half for the front. And that, actually, I think I'll just use part of that. So I want sort of a longer, yeah, there we go. And that, I'll just tap that down. For the center, I have this green yellow, which is the yellow I've been using all along, Sculpey Soufflé Canary, and I added just a little bit of one of the greens that I've been using to make this kind of bright green. But, you know, again, if you look at pictures of bee balm online, it comes in all different colors and even different shapes and configurations. So this is just the one that was closest to what I saw in my garden, but you can make yours a little bit differently. I hope you take these techniques of shaping and forming and use them to recreate your favorite flowers from your garden. So we have a little oval of this bright green. I'm going to stick that, make sure I'm covering up all the ends, and then really, you don't want to see a lot of this. Really use this, kind of poke it down in there. And there you go, bee balm. Here are my little flowers after they've come out of the oven. They release very easily from the tile, and now you can use these to design a slab of your choosing. The advantage to pre-baking your flowers is that you have so much more control over your final design. These were created on the polymer clay slabs, and that is where they are, especially once I cut them out. I'm kind of stuck with this design. I can add other things to it, but say I wanted to scooch this over a little bit. Well, I can't do it now because it's all done. But with these pieces, you can design your slab however you like, shift things around, arrange and rearrange until you are completely happy with what you have. You can also use that opportunity to try out different color backgrounds. Here are these exact flowers on a black background. And I also made a template to test out which shapes I liked best. I did take some of my green clay and add in some dots for filler. In this next one, I used brown clay for my slab, which gives it a much more autumn feel. And instead of leaving the background solid, I used a ball tool to give it some texture. Now, if you just want to make a single little composition, then you probably could leave the stems on. For example, here's this one that I thought would be really cute with like one of these echinacea stems, maybe one of these bee balm. And again, if I left it bigger, I was just cutting it down to make a sample. Used a small cutter to cut out a shape. So obviously you want to leave your background as big as you can manage to give you all kinds of creative control, because the size of my background right here is limiting me. But you get the idea how you can design with these pieces. Those other two on the black and the brown backgrounds that I just showed you, I left the whole area around it really big so I could plan and design all I wanted. So we're back to this background. Another advantage to doing that is it's very difficult to put all these down without making dings and marks and such. If you need to, you can lift your pieces off and smooth your background down. So here's a cutter. And those other two shapes, by the way, that I showed you are cutters from Create Along. And I'm just going to lightly mark this. I can hardly see that, so I'm sure you can't. All right, I'll mark it a little harder. You just want to be able to see your outline. Then you can start designing. And you see these ones, I think, really are much better without the stems. The only ones that are going to keep their stems are the Snapdragons, and that's just because of the nature of the flower, the way it grows. See, I can move this around, which if I was creating these right on the slab, I would not be able to. There are just a couple, I think, disadvantages to doing it this way. One is that you don't get that kind of serendipity you get when you have a whole slab and then you start cutting pieces out, and often you have interesting, unexpected compositions. So you don't get that. So it's really up to you what you prefer. Do you prefer the creative control, or do you prefer that kind of randomness? Yeah, there's one with a stem, but maybe I'll leave that like that. I would suggest that once you have these planned out, just take your time, plan it out, and then snap a picture. And once the picture is taken, you can take all of these off, add liquid clay to the background, and then resume designing. So this is what I mean by having control, that I wanted something different here in the end in my final design. And because I have all of these pieces pre-baked, I'm easily able to do that. And you can see I'm dinging up this background clay. So like I said, when I'm done, I'll snap a picture and then pull everything off, smooth my clay out, and then put them back. The other disadvantage to doing it this way is that because you have baked clay going over the edges, that does make it tricky. You can't just take a cutter and press straight down. It will make a mess. So I suggest you do is once you're happy with your design and you've taken it off, added liquid clay, and then what you can do is put your cutter on and just use your craft knife to cut your pieces that stick outside the cutter. And in some cases, I would suggest, even with cutters like this that aren't very sharp, they have a fairly thick edge, I would actually just use the cutter as a template and use my blade to cut around it. I've done other videos showing you how to make little tiny flowers in polymer clay, and I made a playlist of them, and it will be linked up here in the upper right. If you've missed my videos, it's been a while since I've made one. I have been active consistently. It's just been for my patron only videos. So if you want to know what you were missing out on, I'll also link to my Patreon page and my Etsy shop where you can see all